everyone, it's Mary Brownlee, licensed professional counselor and trauma therapist. Today we're going to be covering the topic of anger, specifically the role of anger in healing complex trauma, which is again those layers of childhood abuse and neglect that really can cause a lot of distress and dysfunction all the way into adulthood. So if you're a survivor of childhood abuse and neglect and you've struggled with this emotion, specifically anger, and you feel like maybe I've gotten stuck somewhere in this process, or I just feel like there's so much anger burning inside of me and I don't know what to do with it, or I've stuffed all my anger and I'm disassociating from it as much as possible because it's so distressing to me, this video will be really helpful for you. So let's get right to it. Everyone, it's Mary Brownlee, licensed professional counselor. Today we're going to be talking about the role of anger in healing complex trauma, which is basically extensive childhood abuse and neglect. So anger is a primary protector emotion, and a lot of us struggle both with not only feeling our own anger after we've been abused and traumatized, but also in expressing it. And it plays a huge role in whether or not we can successfully move through the actual trauma and heal it. So anger is really important in the resolution of trauma symptoms. So this is what I'm focusing on today because I see it come up so often in my clients somewhere along their journey as we're working through their trauma, but also in my own journey as a trauma survivor myself and in how I healed my own childhood abuse and neglect. So yeah, anger. Let's get right to it and really dive into why this is such an important topic if we are recovering from childhood abuse and neglect and trauma. All right, so a lot of us probably were the recipient of negative messages in childhood about anger. Ironically, and I bet a lot of you can relate to this, a lot of times the person who was doing all of the abuse was the angry one, right? And, the parent that was raging and screaming and yelling and criticizing and all of that. They were allowed to express emotion, but we, the child, were not allowed to express emotion, and especially not anger back at the parent. So this is something that is very destructive to us as we are developing and growing, that essentially our own natural protector is shut down. And so that contributes greatly to our inability to protect ourselves later as an adult, whether that's in future abusive relationships or, for example, in the workplace, if we have unfair treatment in the workplace or any other number of situations in which we kind of stay silent and don't protect ourselves. So a lot of these negative messages are for sure within our own culture, about anger being harmful or bad or inappropriate to express. For example, again, ironically, the abuser is allowed to express anger, but of course the victim is not. There are gender differences. I see this a lot, especially with women. A lot of us have negative messages around anger and the expression of anger, and that we're not good girls if we get angry. And so thus we really shut down a lot of our own natural protective anger at a young age because it was inappropriate for us to be angry and it wasn't nice and it wasn't the good girl thing to do. So yeah, if you're a woman, you can probably relate to that message as well. And also negative consequences if we were kids and expressing anger. How many of you might have gotten angry at your abusive parent and maybe yelled back or did some sort of angry outburst back at the parent only to be horrifically punished or abused in response to you potentially trying to protect yourself with anger. So a lot of these things contributed to us shutting down our own natural emotion to being abused and traumatized and harmed. And so, this is such an important part for us to reclaim our humanity and our natural expression and ability to protect ourselves through this very important emotion. All right, the first incorrect message that I would like to dispel about anger is that it's bad. It's not bad. So anger is an emotion just like any other emotion. And what people need to understand about emotions is they are our primary way of obtaining information about the environment around us, about other people, about situations. And emotions are there to protect us. They serve to provide information. They serve to tell us what's safe and unsafe. And anger really is our main protector. So anger is the one that says, ding, 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 hey, pay attention. You're being harmed and we need to do something about this. This is not okay. This is dangerous to us. This is harmful to us. Make it stop. So really, anger is your primary clue that you've had some sort of boundary violation. And by boundary violation, I basically mean somebody has harmed you and crossed a line that they shouldn't have crossed, that likely resulted in you sustaining like emotional harm or physical harm or psychological harm. So yeah, anger is the primary protector emotion. So we do not want to get rid of our anger. It is there to keep us safe. So that is the first myth about anger that I want to dispel. Second thing I want to point out is that anger is sad's big brother. So what do I mean by that? Anger is a surface emotion. It's usually the one that we have the easiest access to and the thing that shows up the first, right? It's easy to see. It's like a volcano. It's the lava spewing out of the top. But what's underneath the big volcanic crater is lots and lots of depth, way more lava. And, it's the harder to access areas that you can't necessarily reach easily. So anger is really that surface emotion that's easily reached. People can tell when it happens, especially if we're explosively angry, like a volcano. But it's hiding a lot of vulnerability and painful emotions underneath usually. And so by saying it's sad's big brother, this is what I see happen repeatedly with a lot of my traumatized clients and myself as well, is that actually anger is hiding sadness. What's underneath it is usually lots of loss, lots of grief, lots of violations that have just filled us with so much pain and sadness. But yet the primary way that's the easiest really to have access to and to feel is anger, right? Because sadness is a lot harder to feel. That's a lot more painful oftentimes. And so what you'll see is that a lot of people have a lot easier access to anger, for example. So another really amazing phrase that I remember learning a long time ago is that depression is anger turned inwards. And so this is very important for those of us who are what I call internalizers. So externalizers are those people that act out their emotions externally. So like you can see them through behaviors and actions, like maybe they're screaming at other people or hitting other people. That's an externalizer. You're going to see their anger very easily. But internalizers are different. I was an internalizer. We don't show our anger on the surface ever, hardly. And so what you actually see is lots of depression and self-hatred and like low self-worth. So we're directing the anger back at ourselves, because usually it's not safe to direct the anger at the actual abuser, right? So when we're small, tiny, helpless children, if you were angry at mom or dad who was the abuser, they were likely gonna, beat the crap out of you or something like that. So it wasn't safe for you to express anger at the abuser. So what happened is a lot of us turned our anger inwards and kept it inside, and it turns into depression, which is also layered in there with lots of grief and loss and sadness. So yeah, anger is usually just a clue of much more hidden, more profound emotions and pain underneath the depths of our hearts and souls. All right, the third main topic that I want to cover that's so important is that anger is not bad because it's part of grief. If any of you are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, you will know that anger is one of the stages of grief. And really, to resolve trauma fully, we need to be able to go through all of the grief stages and resolve them. And that means confronting and resolving our anger as well, and not blocking it or stuffing it or hiding it or running from it. Grief and loss and sadness are natural parts of being harmed, as is anger. And so this is one thing that I myself had to go through to successfully resolve my own trauma, as well as something I guide all of my clients through, is how common and normal it is to grieve. So even though we have been abused and traumatized by our families and our parents, it doesn't mean that we didn't love them. And it doesn't mean that we had hopes and dreams for a better relationship. And oftentimes we tried over how many years and decades even to try to make our abusive parent love us, and it just didn't work. So there are layers of loss in here, loss of hopes and dreams of what we wish could have been, loss of a parent that the relationship with a loving parent that we never got, loss of our own identity, loss of our own sense of safety in the world, loss of being able to relate to others and feel safe with others. So there's so many layers of loss in there. And so the primary way that we're going to try to heal complex PTSD and complex trauma is through the resolution of grief. And anger is just one of these stages. And so it's important that we allow ourselves to feel whatever it is we need to feel so that it can resolve itself. So if we avoid anger, or we suppress anger, or we run from it, you name it, that stops the grief process. And so what I want everybody to know is don't stop your natural grief process. Part of healing from complex trauma is we're going to need to confront all the painful emotions, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and let them pass. And they will pass. That is the good news. By not blocking and suppressing and stopping them anymore, they will naturally pass. That is what grief does organically and on its own, is it passes. Thank goodness, right? So as human beings, we're so remarkably resilient, and grief is really naturally hardwired into us, to the resolution of trauma and loss. And so I just want to normalize anger as part of the grief process, and that it's okay to feel anger, and it's an important part of us reclaiming our humanity and healing from this type of trauma. The fourth thing I wanted to point out about anger, and this comes really from the medical research part of it, is that holding into anger and suppressing anger is not good for our physical health. A lot of you probably suspected this, right? Because it's like you can actually physically feel it in your body as you're suppressing anger. It comes out like in clenched jaws and our clenched muscles and the guarding that our body does. So yeah, holding into anger has actual real physical consequences in the body. I mean, it can result in things like high blood pressure. It can definitely increase depression and anxiety. It can increase our risk for like heart disease and heart attacks. It increases our stroke risk. It lowers our immune system. And, can shorten our lifespan, for example. So if any of you are interested in what the research has shown about adverse childhood experiences, that was the first video I ever did on my channel. Feel free to go look that up if you are interested. But the research is very clear. Chronic abuse and trauma results in massive physical risks in addition to things like substance use and mental health disorders and all of that. And a lot of that is due to the chronic levels of stress hormones in our body. So if we're under a lot of constant threat, which you will be if you're a trauma survivor, right? You're going to have things like cortisol and adrenaline, which are really responsible for us remaining safe. That's part of our fight, flight, freeze system. But normally cortisol and adrenaline is supposed to go down. So we face a threat, it goes up to help us face the threat, and then it's supposed to go back down. But if we are survivors of chronic trauma and abuse in childhood, it never went back down, right? Because the childhood experiences were so numerous and so profound that we were in a state of fight or flight probably for most of our childhood because our parent was fundamentally so disordered and the family life was so chaotic at home that it was very hard for us to really have a nice calm baseline. So yeah, these high levels of adrenaline and cortisol are the main reasons why a lot of trauma survivors have poorer health outcomes and even early death, for example. So it makes sense that holding and suppressing anger is going to release a lot of these stress hormones as well and contribute to poorer health outcomes. And also it can contribute to people displaying negative behaviors even, like passive aggressive behaviors, for example. So maybe they're not externally showing anger, but they're slyly and underhanded ways showing anger too. So yeah, suppressing anger isn't good for us, both physically and mentally and emotionally. And even with, certain behaviors, more passive forms of anger, it's not helpful, right? It's not helpful to our relationships. It's not helpful for our health. And yeah, that's another reason why suppressing anger is not good for you. All right, the first thing that I want to really discuss is how important it is for us as trauma survivors to reclaim anger. Anger is our primary protector, as I mentioned, and without a protector like anger, it's very easy for us to let people walk all over us. I mean, how many of us, myself included, reformed people pleaser here, would just let everybody walk all over me? I actually had like a phobic fear of like conflict, right? So in my family, my father was very scary. He was the one that would explode into rages when I was a lot younger. He was violent with my older brother, and he was really scary. Like walking on eggshells is how you felt around him. And so what that did, his displays of extreme anger scared the living crap out of me as a kid. And so what happened was I learned to be afraid of my own anger and also other people's anger. So I became a massive people pleaser and conflict avoider. And then what that really did was it cut me off at the knees in terms of my ability to protect myself from future abusers, which did happen. As I got older, had relationships with other people, and several of them were also abusive. And so this is why it's so important for us to reclaim our own natural feeling of anger, especially in response to harmful behaviors, because anger is going to tell us, hey, whoa, full stop here. Somebody is being inappropriate. They're harming me. They don't have a right to do that. How dare they? And this needs to stop right now. So no, nowhere would I be saying, oh, let's just go out and like physically fight people or, assault people because we're angry. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about constructive use of anger. And anger used constructively is protective and healthy and good for us. And constructive anger really comes in the forms of like assertiveness, speaking up for ourselves clearly and calmly, and good boundaries, telling people straight up, hey, don't speak to me like that. That's incredibly disrespectful. I'm not going to tolerate that. Yeah. So it's important for us to reclaim anger as appropriate, especially when we have been abused and harmed, and that we have the right to actually protect ourselves with constructive anger as well. So yeah, anger is not just bad across the board. No, used constructively, it can be used as a great ally in our toolbox to protect ourselves from future abusers as well. All right, the second one, and I already discussed this a little bit before, is that our emotions are hardwired. They're there to keep us safe. They're there to help us make decisions. And it's important to recognize that both our emotions and that rational part of our brain needs to be in balance. Like we need both to be fully human. So I don't want anybody to get the mistaken idea that, like emotions are better than rational thought or rational thought is better than emotions. No, no, no. As human beings, we are made to function with both, and they're both equally important, and they both help us to really be a healthy whole human and to live our lives with purpose and meaning. So we need both emotions and the rational side of our brain to really function at our best. And anger, again, is part of the entire spectrum of emotions and is just as important as any other emotion. So yeah, emotions serve really to protect us, to keep us safe, to inform us in terms of what's going around, us, for example, and they help us make decisions and choices. So yeah, emotions are super important, including anger. We don't want to get rid of any of them. They're important for us in all of our functioning. All right, the third one that's near and dear to my heart is that changing the way we relate to anger and changing old messages that are no longer helpful or serve us about anger serves to correct the messages that were harmful to us and that kept us silent and quiet and kept us people pleasing and not protecting ourselves, for example. So those old messages that we learned as a child about anger and the expression of anger, they don't serve us anymore. They were not helpful. They contributed to us being harmed and abused and violated. And so by reclaiming our anger in a healthy, constructive way, we're undoing a lot of those old harmful messages from our childhood that no longer serve us. So yeah, allowing our anger validates that the abuse we went through was wrong and that we deserved better. So this is such an important turning point in any trauma survivor's story and healing process, is recognizing that what happened to you or what happened to me was wrong. It was wrong. It never should have happened. And that we have a right to feel angry at what happened to us. And as soon as we allow ourselves to reclaim this natural expression of of anger from being violated. This allows the story of our trauma to move. So instead of it getting really stuck in a period of time, it allows the story to start to move again. Oh my goodness, I'm allowed to feel anger when I've been violated. I'm allowed to recognize that abuse is wrong. I'm allowed to protect myself. I'm allowed to say no to abusers and to draw boundaries, right? This is like so important and primary to us being able to protect ourselves moving forward, and for us to recognize that it was never our fault in terms of what happened to us. How many of you as abuse survivors, right? How long did it take you to stop blaming yourself for what happened to you? Like, the abuse that happened to you was never your fault. You never deserved any of it. All of us are born completely innocent, beautiful babies, and we deserve to have loving, safe families. That's a human right. It's a human right. And so it's natural and appropriate to feel anger that we had these horrible experiences that were not deserved. And so part of our story and rewriting that story of what happened to us is reclaiming anger and understanding, hey, I didn't deserve anything that happened to me. I am fundamentally a worthy human being, deserving of love and safety, and I'm allowed to feel angry at what happened to me so that I can move forward and not just be stuck for years or even decades in this angry stage of feeling violated and not knowing what to do with that. So yeah, this is another really important part of our healing as a trauma survivor. And the most important part of why it's so important to reclaim anger as a trauma survivor, it goes back to those grief stages. If you get stuck in anger, or you suppress anger, or you know, avoid anger, you can't complete the grief process. And if you are familiar with the grief stages, you know that the final stage is acceptance. And what acceptance looks like, at least I can speak from my own personal experience, is that you understand the events that happened were not your fault. You no longer blame yourself. You see yourself fundamentally as a lovable and worthy person, and you put the blame back where it belongs, which is on the abusers. But you're not holding anger anymore. It's like, yep, that happened to me, but I'm okay. And I'm not going to let that define me anymore. And I'm moving on in my life. I'm going to make new friends. I'm going to make a family of choice. I have a job I love, and my life still has plenty of purpose and meaning. And the past is no longer going to define me. I'm writing the chapters of my book now. The abusive family is no longer writing in my book. I'm writing my book for the first time. They don't get to write any more chapters, and I get to write what happens to me from now on. That's what acceptance looks like. It really is this sense of deep peace where you're fundamentally happy with yourself. You finally feel safe again. You finally have gotten away from the abusers, and life is looking pretty good. And you realize, oh my gosh, there's so much life left to live. And I'm not going to let the abuser take one more moment away from me. They've already stolen half my life or however long it's been. I'm not going to give them one more moment in my brain anymore. And I am moving on in my life and reclaiming it, really. So that's kind of what acceptance looks like. And without being able to move through anger, you can't get to acceptance. So that's why it's so important to not block or suppress or numb anger or deny it, because you can't really get to acceptance, the final stage of grief and loss, unless you experience anger. So I hope that this video made sense and was helpful. Feel free to ask me any questions. If you have any further questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. You can drop a comment below if you'd like to. Would love it if you liked and subscribed if you found this video helpful. Your support means so much to me. And my heart goes out to all of you trauma survivors. I will continue to put out more information on healing from complex trauma. It's such a passion of mine. And yeah, again, I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.